I'm so sorry. I'm terrible. I really had to go to the bathroom. I don't know if you saw me fidgeting towards the end. I'm really bad at that. My bad. So let me keep going. And we're almost finito with part 1 of the book. So I'm going to hope that I can try and just power through this and get it done for you guys, because this has taken a few videos, but it's also good when the videos aren't quite as long. So let's continue. Among these energy forms that present themselves as images in our dreams, there are archetypes. Among these energy forms that present themselves as images in our dreams, there are archetypes, but the greater number are not archetypes. Sorry, one-eyed cat. Do not correspond to universal patterns. They are merely personal energy systems of the dreamer. People often become confused when they first hear of the archetypes and wake up to some of the awesome symbols in which the archetypes appear. They may think that every image that appears in a dream represents an archetype, or they may get the impression that there is a set list somewhere of all the archetypes and that one could interpret all dreams' symbols by taking the most likely archetype from the list and applying it to the dream symbol. Neither of these ideas is accurate. There is probably an infinite number of archetypes, as there are innumerable traits and character patterns that exist universally among humans. Identifying an archetype is a matter of sensing that one is keyed into a universal human energy system, seeing a powerful symbol that springs from deep within our collective human nature. It is not a matter of working from a list of types that someone has made. In this area, we have not only the right, but the duty to draw on our own creative imagination. We are free to call the archetypes by names that have meaning for us as individuals. Later we will talk more about this. Some examples should give a clearer idea of how we encounter archetypes. In all cultures and religions, since the beginning of history, the idea of the soul has sprung up spontaneously. Humankind has always intuited or posited the existence of an entity within that was invisible yet active. Men often refer to their souls as a feminine presence in poetry and religious allegory. Sometimes the soul was seen as an inner woman who made a marriage with Christ or made it possible to commune with God. Sometimes men envisioned a feminine muse who inspired them to poetry, literature, art, or refined sensibility. Women, by contrast, often imagined the soul as a masculine presence that provided wisdom and strength. Jung discovered that what people called the soul in religious language actually has a psychological counterpart, a specific and objective part of the inner psyche that acts like the soul of religion and poetry and performs the same functions that have been described. In men, the soul appears in dreams as a feminine presence. In women, it usually appears as a masculine figure. To distinguish this objective psychological entity from a religious notion, Jung called the feminine figure the anima, and called the masculine figure in women's dreams the animus. Okay, babe? These two words mean soul and spirit, respectively, in Latin. In later chapters, we will see some examples of the appearance of anima and animus in dreams and imagination. The point here is that the main characteristic of an archetype is its universality, that it produces a structure or an energy form that appears to exist in the psychological structures of all men and women, everywhere. This is true of the soul, both as an objective entity and as a universal symbol. These are part of our human heritage, part of what makes us human. Not only does the soul exist among all people as an inner reality, but it generates a universal set of symbols, the various images of an anima and animus, by which it represents itself. Puppy, I have this big book right here. This, hold this up.
You using it? What?
I'm almost done though. Sorry. So we can find a similar set of images in the dreams of most men for the anima, as well as in myth, folk tales, religion, art, and literature. And the same is true of the universal symbolism of the animus for women. Just as an archetype may be most easily identified as an inner structure, as in the case of anima and animus, It may also be universal quality that all people recognize, or a universal way of feeling and behaving that we all pass through. For example, a woman might dream that she found herself in the presence of the god or goddess of love. Love is an archetype. To love is a performed tendency in humans, part of the primordial blueprint for our human way of feeling, relating, and acting toward others. It finds its way into every person and every culture. It is so universal that to say so seems unnecessary. The woman who dreams of this archetype is not made up only of the urge to love. She also has the capacity for hatred or spite, as we all do, hidden away somewhere within her total personality. But in her dreams, she is in the presence of an image that represents the archetype of love. Love as a universal, superpersonal force that rushes out of some place deep in the primordial psyche of our species. In the face of that image, if she can see that it is the universal energy of love that is challenging her and affecting her, she can better understand her feelings, emotions, and behaviors. We mentioned earlier that there are innumerable archetypes in the human unconscious. Determining that one is dealing with an archetype in one's dream is a matter of sensing when some universal human instinct or pattern is behind the image, or recognizing a symbol as one of those primordial images that bespeak the timeless and ubiquitous human qualities. We don't need to know which of these have been officially designated as archetypes by Jung. We don't need to know by what names Jungians have called them, although that might be helpful at times. Jungians usually find their names for the archetypes in myths and ancient religions because that is where the images first appeared, often in their most dramatic and memorable form. For example, the archetype of the heroic journey in which one is tested by fate is often called an Odyssey because its greatest image is the journey of Odysseus. But all such names are to some extent arbitrary. We are all free to use our own judgment, feelings, and imagination in deciding whether we are dealing with an archetype, and we are free to use the names for them that are most meaningful to us. Years ago, a young graduate student came to work on his dreams with me, and a masculine figure began to appear repeatedly in his dreams. The student spontaneously invented his own name for this friendly male companion that showed a universal character. He called him the tribal brother. The dreamer and his tribal brother lived among a tribe of Vikings in an ancient age in Europe. In some dreams, he and his companion were warriors and went to battle together. In others, they were healers. In one, they discovered a radiant and magical woman in a white robe who became the dreamer's consort. Together, they went through all the struggles and numinous discoveries of young manhood. The dreamer's friendship with his inner figure was so close and felt so real that he felt lonely whenever he had to go for many days without seeing him in his dreams. It is apparent that the tribal brother is an archetype and that there is a corresponding tribal sister archetype in the structures of women. Men and women often dream of such a figure in the years of early adulthood, someone of the same age and sex who is their help, their loyal ally, and their companion in the trials and challenges of life. And the image corresponds to an objective reality, for the energy system actually lives inside the individual and lends its strength and consciousness to his or her development, just as the image describes. In a woman, the tribal sister is an archetype of feminine consciousness that augments her sense of her feminine side and fortifies her identity as she evolves into a mature woman. I cite this example to emphasize that you have the right to make your own judgments and choose your own names. No one will find tribal brother written in some standard list of archetypes or a dictionary of symbols. Nevertheless, a dreamer saw this symbol in his dream, recognized it as a universal image in human life, and found a name for it that comes out of the archaic past. This is within your power as well as his. It sometimes makes it easier to see how the personalities who appear in our dreams correspond to great forces in human nature if we compare the archetypes to the ancient Greeks' conception of the gods. The gods, as the Greeks conceived them, were forces that interacted with individual human lives. These forces were present in every life, yet were universal, timeless, and lived outside the limits of a particular life or time. The gods could as well have been described as fields of energy, acting on the human race. Yet their images presented integrated personalities, and that's italicized for emphasis. Their images, meaning the gods, presented integrated personalities that are similar to the persons in our dreams who carry an aura of great power and fit some great type in human nature. For this reason, Jung said that the heroes and gods of the Greek pantheon were actually symbols par excellence for the archetypes. Their images express the universal primordial types that make up the human personality. Strictly speaking, the archetypes are not forces, but rather the pre-existing patterns that give typical shape to the forces in us. Nevertheless, when we encounter the images of the archetypes, we always feel the power that has been shaped by the image. We feel that we have tapped into not only a symbolic type, but also a huge reservoir of superhuman power in the collective human unconscious. We can feel the archetype as a charge of energy. It feels as though it were outside us, something the conscious mind has to interact with, to deal with. When we see them at work as forces that move us and influence us, we can begin to understand why the Greeks and other ancient peoples understood or experienced them as supernatural powers. Because the energy systems formed by the archetypes are transpersonal, universal, corresponding to timeless and primordial realities, we actually experience the archetypes in dreams as though they were divinities or gods. We experience them as the great powers. They sometimes help us, sometimes threaten us, alternately strengthen or overwhelm us, liberate us or possess us, depending on the evolution we are passing through and the issues involved. We feel them as great, transcendent, eternal energies that are outside our control, even as they are part of our lives and nature. As with most psychological concepts, there is much in the idea of the archetypes that is connected to ordinary everyday life. We feel and sense the archetypes at work in our daily lives without identifying them as much. For example, if we know a woman who has struggled against overwhelming odds and shown superhuman courage, we will say, "She is a heroine. She has performed heroically through all this." Without thinking about it, we acknowledge that the archetype of the heroine, lives in her, forms part of her character, and that she has behaved in accord with that universal type that we instinctively know. In another case, we may say that a man we know acts like a Scrooge. We mean the archetype of the cynical miser, another type or personality pattern we all recognize, manifests in that man's attitudes and behaviors. The archetype of the hero or heroine lives in each of us. So does the archetype of the miser. This is why we instantly recognize them in others. In some people, a particular archetype is strongly in evidence. We can see it written all over them. In others, the archetypes are potentialities that remain in the unconscious. The heroic archetype, for example, may surface in a particular person only when a crisis demands it, or love or loyalty inspire it. None of us is just one thing. We are not monodimensional creatures. We are rich combinations of the infinitely varied archetypes. Each of us is part heroine or hero and part coward, part parent and part child, part saint and part thief. It is in learning to identify these great archetypal motifs within ourselves, learning to honor each one as a legitimate human trait, learning to live out the energy of each in a constructive way, that we make inner work a great odyssey of the spirit. The archetypes are often presented by the unconscious in images that are divine, royal, magical, or mythical. If the archetype of the universal heroine appears in your dream, she may take on the visage of a legendary figure like Joan of Arc. She may have on shining armor or carry a magical sword. Generally, there will be something that creates the feeling of nobility or authority. Even if the specific feeling of awe, divinity, or magic is not present, there may be a feeling that one is looking at the prototypical example of the universal type, quality, or experience. The mother of mothers, Father Time, the war that is Armageddon, the love that encompasses all human experience of love that has ever been. Oh my God, I'm still not done. I'm going to pause this video here and then I'll come back and I'll start with another one tomorrow because it's dark outside and my hubby's here and I think we need to eat dinner. Is that right?
Eating dinner?
Okay, bye.